Trade tensions between the U.S. and China persist, even amid recent efforts to follow up on talks between their leaders last month and to lay the groundwork for a planned visit by Washington's top diplomat to Beijing early next year. So how are efforts on the diplomatic front progressing? What is the latest with regard to the chip war between the two countries? And how does the U.S. China chip war look to affect South Korea? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we revisit the standoff between Beijing and Washington in efforts to address it. For more on this, I have Professor Jack Zhang at the University of Kansas here in the studio. Professor Zhang, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
I also have Professor Shin Sang-hyup at Kyung Hee University live on the line. Professor Shin, again, it's a pleasure to see you as well.
My pleasure.
Professor Zhang, we'll start here in the studio. Earlier last week, a senior U.S. delegation was in China to follow up on summit talks in Bali in November, as well as to lay the groundwork for a planned visit by Secretary of State Antony Blinken in early 2023 to China. What are your thoughts on these diplomatic efforts between the two countries?
Well, first let me say Lawrence, Kansas is a long way from Washington, D.C., so I don't have any special insights on what the Biden administration hopes to achieve and pursue in China. But based on my understanding, the Biden administration wants to pursue competition with guardrails vis-a-vis China, and that seems sensible, right? Talk is good, it's preferable to fighting. Preventing a dangerous spiral, especially inadvertent spiral towards conflict, is definitely something to be avoided. And they seem to be determined to negotiate from what they call a position of strength. And right now there's, I think, an opportunity for that, right? China faces severe economic challenges on many fronts, stemming from the chaotic U-turn from zero COVID, over-leveraging of the real estate sector, slowing consumer and export growth. So there's a lot of pressures in the Chinese economy, and so there's a real opportunity here, I think, for the U.S. delegation, when they do visit China, to seek some policy concessions beyond the the purchase agreements that were secured in the Phase 1 trade deal. And so I'll be eagerly watching to see what happens and hope that this will be an opportunity to wind down some of those Trump-era tariffs in exchange for real progress on the policy front.
Right. Professor Shin, as Professor Zhang has mentioned, last week's talks had both parties highlighting the importance of making sure that competition must not veer into conflict. What then, Professor Shin, are your thoughts on the possibility of an actual hostile confrontation between the two countries?
Well, I do think the chances are not quite low. I mean, as Professor Zhang already explained, at the summit meeting on the last November, the two leaders, President Biden and President Xi Jinping, discussed about some sensitive issues, but they made it clear that they will keep on discussing about these issues in order to reduce the differences in their opinions about these issues. So at least for the time being, of course we have to wait and see, but at least both sides will make every effort to maintain or keep the channels to discuss about these sensitive issues in order to I think these things will be very important for their national interest, but at the same time, this seems to be very, very important for the global community, because these two countries, as we know very well, the giant economic giants, which are very important in the global economy.
Right. And against the backdrop of diplomatic efforts, Professor Zhang, on the chip front, though, pundits claim that the U.S. and China are already involved in a warfare of sorts. Do you care to elaborate on the chip confrontation between the two countries?
Yes, the escalation to export controls on advanced semiconductors that the Biden administration implemented in September represents a real shift in the so-called tech war, and really the first move that I would consider a move towards technological containment of the Chinese economy. And this is, some call this the Sullivan Doctrine, right, which is for the U.S. to maintain the largest possible lead on force multiplier technologies. So these technologies, like advanced semiconductors that can be used for AI and quantum computing and things that have dual use, so can be applied to advanced military means. However, they can also be used for a lot of other types of crucial in other kinds of industrial uses. And so this is a really, really major shift. China's responses have been muted thus far. It's rolling out a package of subsidies for domestic chip producers. Last week, it filed a WTO complaint against the United States. This is largely symbolic, I think, because starting from the Trump administration, the U.S. has really hamstrung the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO. This escalation and tit for tat, I don't think we're seeing the end of this front of the conflict. And curious to see what happens next.
Right. And against that backdrop, Professor Shin, simply speaking, what have been the repercussions of this chip confrontation between those two countries on South Korea?
Well, like coin, which has two sides, I think we will have positive effects as well as negative effects. On the short-term basis, because of the China's lockdown, certainly the Korean semiconductor industry will have some advantages in increasing their exports to the global market, because certainly Chinese the semiconductor industry will get some negative impact because of the USA government policy. So this can be one of the positive aspects which South Korean semiconductor industry will get. But there will be negative impacts as well. On the short term, at the moment, out of total Korean semiconductor exports to global market, the 40% exports go to China, and then in the middle of this kind of difficult situations on the Chinese economy, Chinese semiconductor industries, they will make every effort to increase, their local production. That means that there could be some possibility that the Korean semiconductor exports to China could be reduced. And at the same time, the thing we can think about is the Chinese industry, semiconductor industries. They will make every effort to get the needed the technologies. Maybe it can be a legal way or legal way. Either way, they want to get the needed technologies. Certainly, there is a high possibility of the technology outflow on the part of the Korean semiconductor industries. So we have to wait and see about on the short-term basis. We will get some more advantages based on the analysis. Whether we will get more advantages or more disadvantages, we have to consider making new strategies in to develop the semiconductor industry in Korea.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, moving forward, Professor Zhang, I understand there are some observers over in the U.S. who are calling for a change in the way America does business with China. First of all, what do they mean, and how do you respond to this change?
Yeah, I think you're perhaps referring to Robert Lighthizer op-ed in the New York Times recently calling for strategic decoupling or moving beyond what the Biden administration is doing towards pursuing decoupling. And I think this is really interesting because I think it's moving the goalposts because the original intent of the Section 301 tariffs, which Ambassador Lighthizer himself designed, was to end forced technology transfers, curb industrial policy, really a slew of policies that were designed to even the playing field and make it easier for U.S. businesses and foreign businesses to do business in China. That would not be the intent of decoupling, right? Decoupling means that we don't want American businesses to be involved with, with China anymore. And so it seems like maybe the ambassador has had a change of heart. Maybe he is intent on cementing his legacy as the architect of decoupling, beyond the Phase 1 trade deal that was negotiated, and to cement his credentials as a China hawk. But I think the U.S. really needs to weigh the cost and benefits of such a move towards decoupling. And my own research shows that the cost of adjustment to policies like tariffs are being borne by U.S. businesses and consumers. And they have not had the intended policy consequences of, for example, pressuring American companies to exit China or leave China, or moving supply chains, reshoring or offshoring, friendshoring of supply chains. And so, we really need to proceed with caution and, seek truth from facts, right? See if the policies that are being put in place, what the economic consequences are, and whether those are achieving goals that are commensurate with U.S. interests or not.
Right. And with regard to South Korea, Professor Shin, How should this country seek to perhaps better navigate tensions between these two superpowers going forward?
I think it's not easy, to answer your question. But I think first of all, Korean government should decide, or draw a big picture in our diplomacy. On the relations with which country we should put more priorities. We have to decide it first, and based on this decision, we have to carry on our diplomacy. But let me give you an example. If we put the priority on security-centered relations with the USA, and then we have to keep on persuading our decisions about toward China and to the United States. We will keep on persuading USA government. In the same context, if we make some decision toward the USA, we have to keep persuading Chinese government why we have to take those kind of decisions, something like that. And secondly, about very sensitive issues, I think unlike the previous government, in Korea, we have to make very clear our stance. Regardless of the relations or expected disadvantages caused by our decision, but we have to make it clear why we have to take those kind of conditions, especially specific issues, and then we should keep those kind of stance. I think that would be very important for us to defend our national interests.
Right. Professor Zhang, there has been a significant shift in the American political landscape. And that being said, how does that reality look to affect perhaps U.S. tensions with China, do you think?
Yeah, so with after the midterms and the new Republican majority in the House, I think that's going to change a lot of things for domestic politics in the U.S. But interestingly, it's not going to make a very big difference, I think, on U.S.-China relations because there's a strong bipartisan consensus on being tough on China. That's shared by Republicans and Democrats. I have some research showing that there's an unprecedented number of tough on China bills going through Congress, that over half of legislators or senators have sponsored a piece of such legislation. That's, bipartisan sort of basis. It's higher than sort of the traditional interest that you see in foreign policy. And, while bipartisan consensus, I think, is needed on a lot of domestic issues in the U.S., like infrastructure, education, healthcare, I think it's actually quite unhealthy on this particular foreign policy issue of U.S.-China relations because I think it encourages groupthink and threat inflation. We are in a situation where the U.S.-China trade war and, wider sort of context in U.S.-China relationships are deadlocking into this war of attrition, of tit-for-tat sort of retaliatory cycles. And each side is now continuing to pay the costs with the hope that the other side eventually will, give up or collapse, right? And I think there needs to be a real conversation to be had about, whether the means that we're deploying are serving the ends that are desired, whether, given all of the domestic challenges that the U.S. and China both face and some of the international interests they have in common, combating pandemics and climate change, right? Whether this approach and this slow slide towards decoupling is serving the American interest. And I think, unfortunately, a lack of a healthy debate in the United States is not serving the interest of the American people there.
Right, I see. Staying in the U.S., Professor Shin, the U.S. State Department has created a new office for China coordination. What do you believe are the implications of this particular creation? Well,
the State Department made it clear that why they launched, this office, and actually they made it clear. They said that that was the decision to coordinate U.S. policies related to China. I think this means the USA started to recognize China as a more important partner. So they needed to improve the efficiency in their foreign policy or policy toward China. Secondly, I think Based on the policies taken by the USA government, I think there was some not very clear, policies, having taken by the USA government, which means that the efficiency in their policy toward China was not very high. So they said that in the future relations, in order to make maximize their national interest, also in order to keep their hegemony power in the global community,
right.
Certainly they want to take initiatives in the relations with China, I think.
I see. All right, Professor Shin, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. And Professor Zhang here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Right, well, that is all the time we have today. We return same time tomorrow with the latest from Ukraine. Do join us then.